think we've got time for questions. What I'll do is I'll take some questions in threes if I can. If you want to show your hands, just to let you know, this lecture's been recorded. The laptop at the front there is recording us. It can't see you, but you will be picked up, obviously, if you ask a question. So, just so you're aware. Please try and be as pithy as possible so we can get through as many as we can. Perhaps I can take the comrade here, because you had your hand up about an hour ago to ask a question, then Sally, and then the gentleman here, and I'll come back to the others.
Actually, most of the questions I had have been answered later on, so there's, I'd have to go through notes, but there's nothing at the moment that I'd like to ask. But thank you very much. All the speeches were great, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, when you talked about terrorism in 2000, my name is Sullivan, I'm campaigning for criminals and communities. When the law was passed, we said that the police had draconian powers, and they are immensely draconian powers. People don't realize, not power of arrest, power of search premises, vehicles, everything else that you think about. Now, the effect of this on the communities, if you look at the Kurdish community, Somali community, Muslim, is massive. What you're talking about, Muslims, Somalis experiencing every day, and much more greater than that. And the issue that we always, the same statements that infused against journalists, protesters, we said that the impact would be that these powers will extend to civil society, and that has happened. One power that you missed out, remember the Schedule 7 powers, I think David Miranda became famous for being stopped as we're coming to the books. Yeah, you can be interrogated, your material, your telephone can be, so that's another power that we have. Now what I'm very confused about is this. There is a law, but there is also the national security strategy called contest. If you look at that, the government can, put regulation under those powers as well, which are entirely non-statutory. Look at the prevent, for example, officers in all councils, for example. They can stop certain meetings happening in universities as well. So this relationship between, what I would call the emergence of national security state, because all this is justified in the name of national security, and we are supposed to be silent about it. And when you find, when you say that they're not keeping, they're talking about this, believe me, there's a national security state there. There's a massive amount of counter-terrorism, counter-extremism, infrastructure within governments, within departments that carry on. Now, in terms of definition, they work to a very vague, broad definition. They can catch anybody. It depends on this. Lastly, finally, I want to say that your fight is a community's fight as well. Is it where lawyers, community activists, and academics need to come together? I don't think we should fight in this alone. I think we should be coming together with the communities and fighting them, because it's a common fight. And the last thing I want to say, it's not a legal fight only. I think what you're doing is extremely important. It's also a political fight. Because if you look at the arguments going in society as a whole in the media, there's a kind of politics anti-extremism. There are people arguing all this time about radicalization of people, how you get people, how people become radicals, how you monitor, how you care, and they're saying this is justified to prevent terrorism. So we have to fight this battle at every level, at the intellectual level, and the level of ideas as well.
Thanks, I'll take the comrade here, and since the first question wasn't a question, we'll take the comrade at the back as well. So if you take it after the question.
Yeah, just a few questions around the 2013 definition. First of all, is that a legal definition in the sense of like an act of parliament? Secondly, serious criminal activity, would that include GBH or assaulting a police officer if they wanted it to? And also, on a wider note, how is domestic extremism being used for some of the, I believe they did preemptive arrests before the Olympics, didn't they? And I wonder how domestic extremism plays into that.
Yeah, I've got some data from the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. Not when I was a journalist, I was acting as a legal journalist, my press card at home. I've also got from another database, the CO11 Public Order one from the Met, intel reports of me being stopped in not just my NUJ card, but the PIN number on it. I've been told, after complaining to the ICO and bringing it up with the Met, who by then had taken over NPRU, that all the stuff on my NPRU stuff has been deleted. Should I believe them? Hasn't it just been moved somewhere else? And if we get rid of the NPRU, there are other databases that talk to each other. There's Patriarch, there's the National Police database, there's all sorts of little other ones. And I understand there's some little audit thing on some of the databases that can tell whether stuff's been deleted or something. And is it possible to follow that audit trail using data protection? I know it's very technical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first question was whether that new definition is brought in by statute. No. Which is why, again, we would say it's still not in accordance with the law, and it's still, we would say, imprecise. But as I said, the bigger issue is that it doesn't really matter, according to the police. It doesn't matter whether you fall within that definition or not. They would still want to retain information about you if you are simply at public events. So that's the issue. In terms of preemptive arrests, yes. Yes, to the extent that whenever I'm instructed in a claim against the police around protest, I would always ask for disclosure of entries from the National Public Order Intelligence Group. It's got a different name there, NDDIU, and now we know again the name of the database. So I'd ask for that particular database. By working out that there is a nexus between that and whether an arrest takes place, or that and whether a prosecution takes place is another matter. If, for example, we could establish in a case that someone who was prosecuted unlawfully had that bit of information, it would be helpful, but it wouldn't be determinative of the case. It would show a kind of propensity to think, if we can find something on this person, we'll prosecute them. But when you're challenging prosecutions, generally, you will look for evidence of police officers fabricating their statements.
Do they ever? Have you ever heard in court them saying, "Your Honour, he is a known domestic extremist"?
No,
they don't do that.
No, and they wouldn't. But yeah. So, I mean, generally, it would be after the event, if you're bringing civil proceedings in relation to those arrests, that you would seek disclosure of it. And I mean, I've got to say, one of the cases, I've been acting for Mark Thomas for a number of years. One of the cases we worked on was we were stopped and searched outside the EdXL, on Square, yeah, sorry, I completely got the name of the... Yeah, that's it, Dicey, yeah. And we were both pleased, but surprised at how quickly the police backed down on his case without providing disclosure to the civil proceedings. If they give you what you want, then there's no obligation to disclose. And now we see that there are all these data entries which were held about Mark, and it may well have been that at the time they thought part of the reason for their decision was we've got all this information, we're going to have to disclose it. Obviously, he was unlawfully stopped and he was detained, but it was quite a quick process. So certainly it's something that we're investigating and we'll have disclosure on. Matt.
Yeah.
Hi. On the you've been told it's been deleted.
I was told that there were two items from the NPRU. One they accepted was a demo I hadn't been on, and the other one would be cycling past the Excel Centre.
Yeah.
And they said that they deleted them.
The real issue is, with any deletion case, the only way that you will know for sure is if they try and misuse it afterwards. That's the problem. I mean, if it was something that's hard evidence, like for example, where I've had DNA and fingerprints, or fingerprints deleted, you've gone into a police station and actually had them shred the copies of that immediately. There's a paper trail of where copies are kept because it's physical. And any digital print, we've got evidence of it going. Having said that, deletion in the digital age really means putting it beyond use. It doesn't actually mean deletion as you would expect, because where there's any digital data, there will be mirror drives. It will be retained somewhere in the ether. There will be some way that a techie can go in there and get that information if they want to. So really what you're talking about is putting that information beyond use, so that the police can't access it readily
How?
until, well, this is it. And in terms of evidence of deletion, so far, you can only tell if it's misused afterwards. Having said that, if we succeed in CAT in the Supreme Court, certainly one of the things we'll be asking for is how they propose to evidence the steps they've taken to delete the data. And that will then be the next strand of it. So it is still something that I'm concerned about, and you're right to be alive to it. In relation to, but as I say, as things stand, really it's only through misuse that you will be able to know whether something they'd said they deleted, they'd actually used. And actually that's where the DNA database came from. It came from the police. They should have deleted DNA in relation to somebody. They didn't. They then sought to rely upon that in evidence in the prosecution, and there was a challenge to that. And that's when, because that conviction was successfully overturned, Jack Straw decided we need a database of everyone's DNA if they're arrested at a police station, regardless of whether they're innocent or guilty. So it's the constant struggles that we face are still there, and we still haven't got to the end of those struggles. So I think, I'm afraid the answer is watch this space on what kind of remedy we're able to secure to the extent that we're successful in that.
I talked to a guy from Memex who made databases for police at Police Fair in 2010. There haven't been any because there have been so many cuts to police just then. And he said there is some audit trail where you can see deletions.
Oh yeah, no, I mean we will receive that, but you know, how can I trust that? So I mean, you can only really get to a certain point before you have to say you have to kind of think, unless this is misused, you know, what impact does it have on me as an individual? If that is ever used against me, then that's contempt of court on the part of the individuals who are involved in breach of the order.
James, do you want to come in on
Yeah, I was going to come in on the communities issue. I mean, obviously we welcome, you know, support from groups and organisations. We've been really lucky that the case got off to a really good start in terms of the media globally taking up the story, and it went everywhere from Dallas, Texas to New Zealand to Japan, and people really interested and very positive, I think, in our case. Came back from covering the Charlie Hebdo protest, and I saw a copy of the Daily Mail, and they were referring to a woman, a teacher, who was being surveillance by her council because she'd had time off work, and even the Daily Mail called it a Stasi council, you know. And I think if you've got the Daily Mail on side about these things, then you're on to a bit of a winner. I mean, during our campaign, I'm not a terrorist, at the height of the campaign, I did actually think it may well, you know, spill over other groups that were being labelled terrorist or had, you know, stop and search used on them routinely might coalesce, you know. But I mean, that kind of didn't seem to happen. I mean, we've seen the spilling over of that kind of tension in the riots, though, and you know, and I think the policing in that respect can in large amount be blamed for that.
I was just going to say, I mean, one of the reasons I first moved moved into the career of being a journalist was whilst I was studying journalism, I actually went and looked at a few protests because one thing I'd seen the 2000 Mayday protests and saw the TV reports, and people I was talking to who were there had a very different account of what was going on. So I attended a couple of demonstrations, peaceful anti-war demonstrations. One I actually attended because, which was the February 13th one, because I believed that we should be protesting against that. But what I spotted there was these police teams with cameras. There was all these people filing past, you know, millions, 2 million, whoever you want to believe, however many people were there, and they were photographing everyone. And I just thought, this isn't right. This is they're treating these people like terrorists, and they've done nothing wrong. They've just had their democratic right to come out and say that they don't agree with this policy that it looks like our government's going to push through. And, that was my first encounter of the FIT teams. Now, ironically, I've become, in the time when it was the Forward Intelligence teams, the FIT squads as they were called, they became a big part of my journalism because, and at the same time, I seem to have become a very big target to them because I was very interested in what they were doing. And that in itself led to the point of, me becoming a journalist because I saw this. I saw it just didn't sit right with me. It didn't seem right that these things were going on. But over the years, what I think I've seen happen all the time that I've been a journalist is, and it kind of equates to the way all these different intelligence units have been brought together into one unit, which is the category of protester and the category of terrorists has slowly come together. And, and it's been bundled into the words, certainly internally, as domestic extremists. And seeing myself in the newspapers, rather than actually reporting, but being the story, and being the story because I've been listed a domestic extremist. The Charlie Hebdo killers are domestic extremists. That's what they're reported as. It's been called terrorists as well. But there's a lot of times in the newspapers, the label that's been put on them is a domestic extremist. How the hell have I, in my job, ended up being labelled the same as these killers? How does that work? That just says something is very, very wrong here.
Mike, how are we doing for time?
You're good. Probably another 15 minutes if people would like it.
Thanks, Mike. Can I take Kevin and then the comrades to his left? I think you both had your hands up.
Yeah.
All right. So you any please? And
Yeah,
then
just-
Kate, I'll come to you.
Just a couple of points. I completely agree with you, Shanik, that the definition of the new definition of domestic extremism is nonsense. And there's an attempt to try and make it sound a bit more rational, but including this thing about serious crime. Given the fact that there's a test of serious crime, which for surveillance purposes under the Regulation of Investigation Powers Act, which says use of violence, financial gain, and I think something along the lines of a group of people involved in a common purpose, which is pretty much a description of every process I've ever been on.
Listening to repetitive beats.
Slightly different piece of legislation, but you see what I mean? On the face of it, serious crime sounds like something that that seems reasonable, but actually you're quite right. It can be, it's open, the interpretation is so easy, and it doesn't really matter. On the question of deletion of records, I did a subject access request. I've got domestic extremism database entry, which is largely around speaking and writing around the Olympics. And what alarmed me about that was how much of it was wrong. It was just stuff that was made up, or it was a very, very cynical and negative interpretation of entirely innocent remarks at a conference that the spin on it was bad. I imagine that in the sort of what was was described as the bonfire of records in the CAC case, that probably disappeared. But that predates me becoming the coordinator of netpols. I guarantee that I have to now go through this ridiculous process, and the 7 months that Jason mentioned is pretty much the average. 40 days to get, nobody ever gets their record within the 40 days. It took me 7 months to get mine as well. And to find out again, I'm going to have to go through the process again. That's the thing, it's not static. It's a snapshot you get at a particular point and you find you get your record back. Most of us who are activists are still activists after that process, and it's the same is true for journalists. You're still going out and reporting this stuff. I think the reason why journalists in particular get targeted is, and this struck me from something that I met Peter Francis, who's the whistleblower, who's revealed much of the information about the Special Demonstration Squad and the surveillance on the Lawrences. And one of the things that he said was fascinating. He said this special branch and sort of the undercover units, well, they're not necessarily interested in you because you're an amazing activist. They're interested in you because they don't know who you are. And so quite often it's small or new movements that get targeted, which is a reason why I think people like UK and CUT were targeted at the point that they were, why other people are. Interesting enough, the other people that are interested in new and emerging movements are the media. Of course they are, because they're always interested in finding out something that's emerging, because it's a good story. And I think that's the reason why journalists get targeted as much as they do, because please see them as being a way of finding out about something that's new, because they have this obviously a different interest, but an interest in the emergency movement. Whether you agree on that or not.
I'll take the next two, but Kevin, can I just check, for those people who may want to make a subject access request, it's right in there, Paul can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some very detailed guidance on our website about how to do a subject access request. I think people need to think carefully about whether it's the right thing to do, because you do actually have to give up a certain amount of information, like your name and address, in order to do it. And it's not necessarily a good idea for everybody. But if you're playing a prominent role in the campaign, then I think it's worth the risk of handing over your name and address and some of the details. Because in other words, if you think there's a reasonable chance that you're on there, then it's worth it.
I'll take the, if you want to go next.
Sure, I'm just going to skip all the questions I had throughout the lecture. I'm just going to focus on one. It's about the intelligence records that you've been mentioning over and over again. To me, I just don't seem to understand, because it takes such an amount of effort and time to collect that whole database, and what is essentially the point of it, that they have the information about a certain person, but to me it seems like surveillance just for the sake of surveillance, and they have it, so they've spent so much time and effort doing it, and so why? How does that, it would affect you with the jobs, as you mentioned, but otherwise I don't understand why so many people are wasting their time doing something that I don't see there is any point of it, just to terrorise the society, or I just don't seem to understand the whole point of it.
One question, what's your name? Sean. You say that when you have a case, you always request for information from the database. But how do you know that they will give you the real information, that won't give you fake information, or cut pieces of essential information you need to get from the database? Where do you get trust from? Because the whole session we have been talking about not trusting them, but how do you trust this one when you are in front of people?
I'll go if you want. Yeah, I mean, absolutely true. The first time I asked about my files, I got nothing back. And the second time I got, back since 2000. Like, and like I say, they keep moving the goalposts in terms of the names of the databases. So how are you going to know? And it doesn't exist now, and it did exist then, and we haven't got a definition for it. It's a bit bizarre. So yeah, I mean, you can't really trust it. I mean, what the judicial review will hopefully put in place is some guidance for this, and so they tighten it up and hopefully get rid of the stuff that they have, and therefore can't use it in any other shape or form. In terms of the wrong entries, that's in my limited the stuff that I got back, it was also wrong, and also forming a kind of opinion of me that I've lied or something to an officer, and it's like, well, how can I even challenge that if I don't know that it's written there, and who else is reading this? You're forming a picture of me. Other people in the case. It's listed their sexuality. It's listed also their medical records of a family member. It's just like, how far? And this is the stuff we're getting back. What about the stuff that we're not getting? This is the big worry, and what is on other innocent people who've committed absolutely no crime. Unless it's a crime to photograph the police being criminals, then yes, hands up. Yeah, I've done that on a number of occasions. In terms of the surveillance for surveillance sake, it does seem like, how many protests and things I spent just trying to ignore them. I was on one particular Palestinian protest, and protester got in front of me and this surveillance team, they're absolutely indignant, an older lady, it's like absolutely indignant about it. They're filming you, why are they filming you, that I'm just there covering the event, and to some extent you can kind of block it out, but then it's like, well, yeah, but they're doing this, it's intimidating for me, it's intimidating for the people around me that I'm photographing or engaging with. It also makes you limit yourself and what you do, you know, because if you're on the way somewhere, you're in the tube, and this has been a case, and a victory for the NUJ, one photographer who filmed a stop and search, and so on. Yeah, you limit yourself. It's like, well, I'm going to be detained here if I photograph it, you know, and it's like, that is not right. If you see something wrong, you shouldn't, you know, have that in your head that, well, I'm going to be, yeah, I could be beaten up, I could be nicked, have my camera broken, you know, all of these things. You know, I covered a, you know, you have to think about it, you know, Topshop a few years ago now, UK and Cut protest, went in and occupied the store, just shouting, you know, pay tax, you know, quite a democratic thing to do actually, with you know, little photocopied things. I went in to photograph it, well aware of the law on trespass and so on. If I'm asked to leave, I have to leave, but I'm there in the public interest, documenting this movement, an emerging movement, as you say. And I was asked to leave. I said yes, fine. Then I took a photo on the way out. I was grabbed by this, what I thought was a security guard, but a police officer, undercover police officer, sexually assaulted and dragged out the back, and arrested. And very quickly, once I think they realised who I was kind of released, but I was banned from Topshop, which was devastating, obviously. I mean, we did receive an apology from Topshop and Arcadia at the highest level. I went in with NUJ legal team and got that, but it doesn't negate the fact that, you know, I do hesitate if there's any kind of protest like that. I'm like, oh, this is going to take a time, it's going to be, you know, all this hassle. You know, I think that to a large extent is also what it's about, as well as collecting this data. It's kind of like this is,
it limits your freedom.
It limits your freedom. You know, I mean, we've got a beautiful little tile in our toilet which is says on it, "Renounce your liberties or the terrorists will take them." You know, and that's kind of the situation we feel we're in now. In terms of, you know, we've got all these politicians at the Charlie Hebdo protest in Paris, you know, very cynically there. You know, a lot of them have got very long lists of abuses of press freedom. And you know, David Cameron comes back and the first thing he says is about limiting encryption. You know, it's like, you know, the contradictions are there to be opened up, really.
Well, I guess the best one on wrong entries was I'm listed as being spotted and stopped at the 2007 climate camp. I'm not sure what that actually means that I was stopped by a police officer, but I was actually in Mexico reporting on the state election at the time. So not sure how I managed to get back so quickly for that. With the surveillance thing, like the whole thing of just throwing out such a wide net of surveillance, I think it does come from an obsession with the police that if you just grab in as much surveillance as possible, you're bound to find something. And I think that is kind of like it's become like a surveillance addiction to them, that if they do this, they're going to find something. They must be able to find something. But the amount of time and money this must be wasting on resources when, you know, I'm sure people would want the police to be keeping an eye on, you know, the few people in this country that probably are willing to do something quite horrible. In fact, you know, I mean, there's quite a few members of the English Defence League that certainly have ended up going through books. They never seem to be labelled terrorists for some reason, the English Defence League, that even when they're found with pipe bombs and written manuals how they're going to recreate the Columbine massacre in Loughborough, that doesn't get them labelled. It doesn't even get them labelled as domestic extremists. So certainly not in the news reports. But that's where resources on police keeping an eye on people should be going. Throwing out nets to keep tracks on thousands and thousands of completely peaceful protesters, what is that doing? That's not. If their argument is we're saving you from terrorism, protecting the country and protecting national security from terrorists. It's not really the best way to be spending that money, is it? If that's genuinely the reason they're doing this sort of stuff.
That's what I was thinking. I'd rather have police officers even going around the streets making sure they're safe rather than sitting at their computers and making sure that photographers are not taking photos in the wrong places or just taking care of surveillance. That's such a waste of resources.
So, are they also like checking social media, like Facebook, and liking the pictures, sharing? Do they have a special system for social media, for example? Because lots of countries, they do like check people's social media pictures.
Yeah, well, we certainly have done with Jason, for example.
I mean, do they have a separate database, or does it all include in the same?
It all came through in the same file.
It all came through.
And it was the same. It was in the same kind of style as all the other logs. So you can only assume it's in the same place. But there's I can't remember which country it was now, but you know, I mean, obviously there's things like social media's become so big now. There's governments are hiring people to actually like or dislike things or attack things on social media. I believe the Israeli government were probably the most recent ones that were captured, caught doing this. It was the Haaretz newspaper in Israel that actually did an investigation that actually caught them doing it. So yeah, those, you know, as social media and the power of the internet has become so strong, and you wouldn't have these things 10 years ago because it took you 10 minutes to upload a page in the Guardian 10 years ago. So no one's really bothered. But now the capability, people are on protest with their mobile phones uploading stuff straight away, going, this just happened. You know, if it wasn't for Twitter and social media and the ability to upload material straight away, what half the things that we know about what happened in Tunisia or Egypt or Libya or Syria, we wouldn't know about those things. We never would. But that's the power it has, but that's also creates a big fear to be able to try and control these things. And yeah, sure, I'm sure that does go on.
The Met has actually purchased software that looks at social media in real time and will do keyword searches on not just on hashtags but certain words and crunches all that information together around a particular process, because obviously it's impossible for somebody to do that or get a machine to do it.
So that could quite easily be sucking in all these live streams straight away because it's tagged with something, isn't it? So this is this protest.
And they've spent money and they bought that software a couple of years ago, so they're certainly using it now.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
To come back to Kevin, your question in relation to the definition, and what we've got to remember is that definition has only come about through questions being asked of the Commissioner, mainly by Jenny Jones, by us asking in the context of litigation in CAT for updates since the HMIC reports. And that's no way to have a policy promulgated which has, when what they're doing has such a fundamental impact on your individual rights. And that's why, I mean, as with the netball challenge, if we're successful in CAT, hopefully we will be, we can push for a policy to be promulgated, a proper policy which says this is when we will monitor what you're doing and this is when we won't. Something that is in such a form that then you can rely upon that if, as an individual, as a protester or member of the press, you realise that your data is being held unlawfully, you can actually challenge it with reference to that policy. Because at the moment, we're before stage one. You know, in any ordinary public law challenge, you have a policy, you would say the actions of the state are not in accordance with that policy, they're out with the policy, or you could argue that there is no policy. And here, there is no policy. And that also comes back to what you were saying in relation to how you know that the information is accurate about you. It's very difficult to know. And whenever we pursue these challenges, there has generally, in all the data challenges that I've dealt with, come a point where it seems as if, or in some cases explicitly, the police have said, this isn't everything we've got on your client. And then you've got to take a tactical decision. Do you push for everything? In which case, there's a real risk you get pushed into a secret court, because if it's the product of covert surveillance, but there are different rules which govern it. And you go into the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which you don't have all normal rules of evidence, you don't have the right to cross-examine witnesses, you don't have open justice, you have closed hearings with a special advocate if you're lucky, and if you lose, you're just told that you've lost. And that's it, not given reason, no reason judgment, which is why I think there's only been one case which has ever been succeeded in like BT. So that's the issue that we all face, and the way to piece it together in disclosure is to try and work out if there is an entry where it looks as if there is another entry relating to it. You know, you've got to read between the lines. You do have to read between the lines and not take anything at face value. So the way to approach it is not to trust what they're saying, and to assume that you're not getting everything, but proceed on the basis that you're going to litigate that point, hopefully win that point, and then say, now we've won that, that principle should be applied to all the data that you retain. And so that's the kind of strategy that certainly we've adopted. In answer to your question about it being a complete waste of time, why are they gathering all this information on demonstrators? They should be doing something else better with their time. You've almost directly quoted what Lord Justice Morvick said in the Court of Appeal in John Catt, where he said, the data about John Catt is of a very limited nature, consisting of little more than the fact of his attendance at protests. There is nothing in the information disclosed to suggest he's ever done anything beyond lend his general support by his presence. Nothing to suggest he actively encourages criminality or public disorder, much less that he's engaged in behaviour of that kind himself. And then he goes on to say, I haven't got the exact quote here unfortunately, but he goes on to say that the police have not made out how the information is of any intelligence value at all. All they said was, it is of intelligence value, trust us, we're the police. That is the definition of a police state, where you have the police saying, leave it to us, don't worry about it, we don't need laws to govern what we're doing, leave it to us, we'll deal with it, you can trust us. And that's really where this case is, and why you can have some, we have one judgment which is completely against us and one judgment which is wholeheartedly in favour of us, because a lot of it does come down to whether or not you think that you can trust the state with this information. And that is a subjective view which will then dictate what kind of judgment you would give in court.
Just two quick points.
So let me check that we've got time. Mike, yeah, can you,
just two quick points about the waste of time. You must realise that the security state is a big thing, and careers involved in it as well. There's money. As soon as you got to a counter-terrorism threat, money comes flowing in. It's a big thing in terms of surveillance as well. So you must realise there's an industry. My other point to your question about having clear policies and implementing them is this. There's a lot of power of discretion to the police officers, to Crown Prosecution Service, to the judges. They exercise massive discretion. Give an example of the CBS supporter who made bombs, etc., and everything else, and he was not charged under the Terrorism Act. Purely discretionary. He was given bail. He was given 2-year sentence. Can you imagine? He had prepared bombs, he had arms, he had cash with weapons as well. No question. And you could come from Syria, and you arrive over here, you could be locked up for 10 years. So there's an element of racism, discretion, whatever you call it. So I think there's a very important element we mustn't forget. There is a law, there is a statute, but the powers are discretionary very often. The decisions are discretionary, and there's a lot of flexibility in there.
Just to quickly answer that, that's exactly why the powers, for example, in Section 44 are so wide and so draconian, because they say on the face of them that you don't need suspicion, but you need to have some basis upon which to stop somebody. If you do not have reasonable grounds to suspect, what does a police officer fall back on? They fall back on prejudice. They fall back on preconceptions which are not rational, because they don't need to have a rational basis for their view. Similarly with Schedule 7 at airports, you don't need a rational basis to stop someone. What do you fall back on? I've had clients who have stopped at the airport and asked who they voted for in the last election. Asked, are you a terrorist?
So we all suspect.
What's the point? It's just really pointless. And it doesn't get them anywhere other than to alienate the whole community. And that's the issue.
I'll take Kate and maybe a couple more. We might have to wrap it up after that. So who else would like to? Maybe someone who hasn't asked a question already, but if not. So one, Kate, Conrad here, and then I'll come back to this chat. Yeah.
Oh yeah, two just quite quick things. I'm from Brighton, where some of us are starting to put in some of these requests. One of them has just reached the expiry date of the 40-day response, which apparently means nothing, which is interesting to know. So I suppose it would be really interesting to get some kind of top tips about what we're going to expect and how to try to fight our way through the bureaucracy that you guys have been through. And the second one's a comment. Maybe I'm just a cynic, but I was reading on the NetPol website about the decrease in numbers of people on the database, apparently from 9,000 to 2,600 or something. All these records have been deleted. Well, for me that is just alarm bells. It sounds to me like perhaps they've created another database, perhaps called like the slightly less extreme domestic extremist database, but that would have serious implications if they have, because when you put in a subject request, you're looking for something very specific on a very specific database. If you don't get it right, you get rejected. So comments on that would be interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the the search words that the government has on special computers that they have. I watched this program called the TYT, the Young Turks in America. And they were talking about journalists like yourselves who are obviously being followed and blacklisted. Some of them even said that they're like special abbreviations on their passports that sort of blacklist them. So like if you're being searched at the airport, then every time you're at the airport, then you're actually blacklisted. And also apparently there's sort of some individuals some groups found out that there are special computers that have special keywords that search mass emails, social media sites and things like that, and they'll have like terabytes and terabytes of information, private information of people, and they sort of we're trying to combat it by requesting that all these groups send similar same words like overthrow, boss, Marxist, things like that, and they sent them at the same time, and there were I think 10 times more emails that came out. So this was sort of their way of just trying to show the media and the public that this is actually happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a very short announcement, which was I am a TV producer and NUJ member. I'm also a playwright, and I've written a play called The Domestic Extremist, which is going on in a couple of weeks. We're also having some talks. I've invited Kevin here, who we haven't met before, but we've been corresponding, to come and talk. So I wanted to give everyone a flyer if you're interested, and maybe ask some of you guys. Kevin suggested I invite some of you to talk as well. But it's all about these themes set in a story about making a TV program.
Actually, I've got an announcement as well. So next week, on the 5th of February, is the second annual Domestic Extremist Awareness Day, which was an idea that we came up with in the pub last year. But basically,
all the best ideas.
All the best ideas come up with. Because there is no definition, because domestic extremism pretty much means whatever the police want it to mean. What we're encouraging people to do is to do that, the honourable and long-standing thing of taking the piss. So we're encouraging people to go on social media and give examples of things, including completely ridiculous examples of things that could mean that you could end up being under a very big catch-all definition of domestic extremist, a domestic extremist. Some of my favourites last year were, I own vegan shoes, that was a good one. I have I'm sceptical about the benefits of a march from point A to point B. You know what I mean? Anything really, but it's because it's partly about raising again and using that as an opportunity to raise again some of the more serious points about the legal cases that are taking place and so on, and just finding a different way of doing that. So if you're on Twitter or Facebook and you fancy getting involved in that, we're encouraging people to do that next Thursday, which is the 8th of February. Get out here in a domestic extremist and online if you can possibly help us with that.
Guys, do you want to have a final words?
Yeah, if you've reached 40 days, the only thing you can really do route that I took is give them a bit more time than that, but what you're going to have to start doing is contacting them by email. And I don't know, give it 50, 60 days, then start emailing, start phoning, and you will then probably, after about another month after harassing them, you'll get a letter that comes through saying your request is taking longer than expected and there's no actual due date for when it will come through. All you can do is just harass them, really. There's no logic to, I mean, the law's there, the law states they should be doing this and they're just not adhering to it. As for finding out if they have moved stuff on or they've got another new database, until we find the name of that next database, there's nothing you can do. You know, this is the problem we had back in 2008. We were looking for stuff on the criminal intelligence database. We had no idea all these other databases were there. A high-ranking officer last year let slip, I think, on Radio 4 that they could have up to 100 databases. But we only know the names of about 10 of them. You just don't know. And if we find out the name of a new one, or if they suddenly change the OIU to the ND, what are they now? The NDEDIU, then obviously there's going to be a database, probably with that acronym, so then you add that onto the list, and it just starts again and again. It's a very long-winded and frustrating process, but it's not designed to benefit us, is it really? So.
I mean, it was kind of just a general thing, really, on, you know, our case is really just part of the jigsaw, really, part of challenging these attacks on our freedoms. We have a situation where, you know, the war on terror is really the war on the citizen. We've got secret courts, attacks on legal aid, secret police. You know, I think people really need to be aware it is the bigger picture, and but if we, you know, we all push in our spheres and pull it all together, then we can get some success.
Just an interest. One thing that you all said, well, you two have said sort of implicitly but not explicitly, isn't all this just designed to? There's no argument that if they're not collecting any information to any use, that it's being designed to stop protest, to crush dissent, and to put people off from doing it. You guys have kept doing it for 10 years, but the idea is just to make it go away.
Yeah, I think that's.
Alright, just checking. Just wanted to make sure it was said anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the arguments in certainly the Equality and Human Rights Commission advanced in CAT. I mean, John's not going to say that they're going to stop me from doing what I want to do. And, you know, wouldn't say that it had an impact upon him, but it's not to say that it wasn't on others. And if you know that you're being watched at a protest, that you wouldn't want to go. Actually, when this was raised, the police, one of their arguments in the Court of Appeal was, if your client, John Catt, has a problem with being filmed or having his data recorded in protest, he's perfectly able to cover his face or walk away. Footnote, unless there's an order imposed under Section 68. So, I mean, and we were actually after that thinking about a big protest where everyone's masked up and kind of saying, well, here we go, this is you giving us some advice on what to do. Hasn't happened yet, but it may well do yet. But coming back to delay and the practical steps, one thing which worked with Mark's case with Jason was give it definitive time and say, I would consider it reasonable for you to respond within a further 28 days in the absence of hearing from you. And then once that goes, then given that we've not heard from you, I'm now proposing to make a complaint to the Information Commissioner's Office. Yeah. And that seems to have worked on both with Jason and also with Mark. Did you do that?
Yeah, we did it with
yes.
Jason as well.
Yeah. So all three of them did that, and that worked. I mean, I don't know, I'm not sure what the lay of the land is now. Kevin might know better, but what kind of responses since CAT, since all these have gone in, whether they've been stonewalling a bit more than they were before, or simply saying it's been deleted. And
when they were I think they were pretty much stonewalling everybody because they were waiting on the outcome of the CAT case. Yeah. That's part of the problem. The other problem is that there has been an increase in the number of subjects requests that have been put in because of the greater awareness of the existence of the databases, and there hasn't been any investment in the staff. So, and they're using that as an excuse. Oh, we just overload. The problem with the Information Commissioner's Office is that they're being a bit weak and saying, oh, that's perfectly understandable, we'll work with them to try and give them a bit more time. And when we're thinking about the possibility of actually taking the judicial review of the ICO, it's just being too pathetic, really, and giving weighting actually away to the Metropolitan Police, because if it's 8 months that somebody's waiting, we know, and there's still no indication of when they might get that information. It's just a flagrant, and there are 30 or 40 people in the same time, it's a flagrant breach of the law.
What you'll need is a very helpfully worded letter which you can then pursue a judicial review to say that this in essence amounts to an indefinite stopgap, that there is no stopgap on this, and that you'll need to look carefully at the way, and it will happen. I've had it in cases where you get a response which is basically saying we will come back to actually accompanying the DNA database cases. When I was involved in challenging that, we put in a whole raft of requests for data on that front, and asked them to respond confirming they delete DNA and fingerprints. And one response we got in particular was worded in such a way that it did look as if it was just indefinite, and we could rely upon that to then get the JR on the ground, and that's kind of what you'd be looking for there. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the ICO, they're pretty toothless, but it seems to have kicked the Met into action on a couple of occasions in the past, and so that's a starting point. As with anything, whether it's pre-litigation or litigation, the more reasonable you appear to be, and the more unreasonable they appear to be, the more likely the court will be on your side. And all you need to do is continue being reasonable and patient, but persistent, and hopefully eventually you'll get a decision that can be susceptible to a challenge. Just coming back to on keyword searches, which you mentioned, I mean, one of the, this is not necessarily on this particular case, but on the surveillance that we're all under in relation to digital communications. One of the justifications for that is that the data, the emails are being stored somewhere and an algorithm is going through them, so it's all technologically facilitated. There are no human eyes on everybody's data, and therefore don't worry about it. It's just computers doing it, so it's not actually interference with your rights. And it's only if through that process we then discover that there is something which is of interest that then someone looks at it. But even then they've got a national security fallback. So certainly this is where it's going, and I mean, CAT will have wider implications. It won't just be limited to this particular database. Again, it concerns, I mean, in the Supreme Court, some of the justices started talking about, well, say you've got CCTV cameras, are you saying that if we were to apply facial recognition technology to that then your right to be engaged even if you're not the target of surveillance? Well, yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. That if you even if you're not targeting somebody, and you end up with facial recognition being able to track you, that's an issue. And on the databases, and the different name of the database, well, the subject access requests that I've drafted that were used by the NUJ and others keep it wide as to what data is retained about the including, and then name some databases. The downside to that is you won't know for certain exactly what data is held about you on that particular database, but on balance I think it doesn't matter, because if you put in a request for data that's held about you and there is some information from an intelligence database concerning something that's nothing to do with you being a criminal or a victim, you'll be able to tell, because you could go through the entries and say, okay, 2005 I was mugged, I remember that, or I was burgled, or I was a witness, I called the police. You'll be able to piece it together. It's the ones which come back which you think, what the hell is that about? Those are the ones which then are of interest, where you'll know that there is data retained about you. And really, as I said before, the question, are you a domestic extremist, it's really moved on. It doesn't really matter whether they call it the domestic extremism database or not. It is a database where the state is retaining information about your lawful and innocent activities. It doesn't matter what they call it. They could call it Bob. It wouldn't matter. It's still bad that they're retaining information about you, and that's the issue.
Thanks.
Well, I think we've overrun now, so thanks for all your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone. Thanks for coming, most importantly. Thanks again to the Manchester Law Society for hosting. Thanks especially to Shamik, Jess and Jason. Can we show our appreciation? say, party on Friday at Garden Court Chambers. It's currently, I think, £10 if you book online. Lots of food and drink.
Prices are higher if you book on the day. Prices are higher on the day.
Prices are higher on the day, I'm reminded, so there's an incentive. We don't have our next lecture organised yet, just keep an eye on the website. Of course, emails will go out to members. And I dare say, if anyone wants to come for a drink, someone wants to go to the pub, so we'll see you outside. Thank you.